Unknown planets, legendary battles, and incredible stories await you here. But don't forget to be a part of this universe. Subscribe, like, comment, be a part of this great adventure. The battlefield stank of scorched metal and blood, thick, acrid, and suffocating. It clung to the air, settled in my lungs, and wrapped around my tongue like a bitter warning. Beneath my boots, the ground was uneven with debris, scorched earth, and the bodies of the fallen, yet none of it mattered. Not to us. We, the Arator, stood in formation, an unbreakable line of warriors bred for war and hardened by centuries of conquest. Our armor, obsidian black and carved with the sigils of 1,000 victories, glowed under the eerie twin moons of this forsaken planet. The air hummed with tension, thick and electric, as we waited for the command to strike. Victory was inevitable. It always was. Yet something was wrong. Across the ruined expanse, our enemy stood, unsheltered and unshaken. They were human, smaller than us, thinner, their bodies built for speed rather than endurance. Their armor was crude, their weapons outdated. They should have been trembling before us, knees weak, hands slick with fear. Yet, they stood there, utterly still, their faces calm. Their leader, a man with silver-streaked hair and a face lined with age, watched us with a peculiar expression, neither defiant nor desperate. Then, to my utter confusion, he grinned. Not in mockery, not in arrogance, but as if we were old friends meeting under better circumstances. And then, as if his amusement had spread like a contagion, his soldiers followed suit. Some exchanged quiet words, some adjusted their helmets, while others laughed. A few even stretched, rolling their shoulders, shaking out their limbs as if loosening up before a morning run rather than standing on the edge of slaughter. One of them, a wiry man with a jagged scar running down his forearm, yawned. Something inside me twisted. This was not how war was supposed to begin. Our enemies always showed fear. They begged, they wept, they trembled before the might of the Arator. That was the order of things. This, however, this was wrong. A low growl rumbled in my throat as I tightened my grip on my weapon. They lacked discipline. They lacked respect. They lacked fear. The order came. We surged forward, a wave of steel and rage. The ground trembled beneath our charge. They should have broken. They should have faltered, scattered, run. They did not. The moment our lines clashed, I knew something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. I struck first, my blade a blur of motion, aimed to tear through the closest human's flesh. But he moved. Not with desperate flailing, not with a sluggish last-ditch effort of the doomed, but with something far worse, practiced ease. He ducked low, avoiding my swing with a dancer's grace, then surged forward, a dagger flashing toward my ribs. I twisted away, countering with a brutal strike. He evaded again, not in fear but in play. The grin never left his face. Beside me, a Arator warrior roared in triumph as he drove his serrated blade through a human's chest, the steel slicing through flesh and bone. A mortal wound. The human stumbled, blood bubbling from his lips. He should have crumpled, choking on his final breath. Instead, he did something that turned my blood to ice. He laughed. A full-bodied, delighted laugh, as if death itself was nothing but a mild inconvenience. He clutched the blade buried in him, exhaling sharply before locking eyes with my comrade. Then, with the last of his strength, he leaned in and patted the Arator on the shoulder. Good hit. Then, with an almost casual effort, he wrenched himself off the blade. He stepped back into formation, staggering, bloodied, but standing. A chill rippled down my spine. I could hear it now, spreading through the human ranks. Laughter. Light. Cruel. Unbothered. This was not war. This was not how war was meant to be. A woman with a scar carved along her cheek met my gaze from across the field. Unlike the others, she didn't charge. She didn't strike. Instead, she twirled a blade between her fingers. A slow, unnecessary flourish. A gesture that spoke of either unbearable arrogance or something far worse. Madness. You're slower than I expected, she mused, her voice carrying over the chaos. Makes this more fun. Fun. The word cut deeper than any blade. These creatures did not fear us. They did not flinch from pain. They reveled in it. I had fought 1,000 battles. I had crushed empires beneath my heel. I had slaughtered species who fell to their knees before us, their terror a song of victory in my ears. Yet here, in the heart of battle, surrounded by an enemy who laughed in the face of death, I felt something I had never known before. My hands clenched around my weapon, my pulse quickened, my thoughts spun. For the first time in my life, I felt fear. Fear is a foreign thing to the Orator. It is an affliction of the weak, a sickness of lesser beings who cower before death instead of meeting it with honor. We do not fear. We do not retreat. We are born in fire, forged in war, and we conquer without hesitation. Or so I had always believed. The humans did not die as they should have. They did not fall with the clean efficiency of a well-executed slaughter. They absorbed pain like it was nothing more than an inconvenience, met death as if it were a game, and worse, they laughed. That sound had infected the battlefield, rising above the clash of steel and the screams of the dying. It did not belong here. It was an abomination, an affront to the natural order of war. I fought harder, faster, determined to silence it. My blade struck true, carving through flesh, breaking bone. A human fell at my feet, clutching a wound that should have ended him. He looked up at me, blood staining his teeth, and grinned. A sharp, biting grin. Not defiance. Not mockery. Delight. He coughed, spitting crimson onto the dust. That all you got? His voice was hoarse but steady. I stepped back, my grip tightening around my weapon. He should have been writhing, choking on his own lifeblood. Instead, he chuckled, a deep, guttural sound, and collapsed, his laughter trailing off as his body finally gave out. I exhaled sharply, wrenching my gaze away. He was dead. He had to be. Yet the unease remained. To my right, a human lunged at one of my kin. Kreshtek, a warrior I had fought beside for decades, turned to meet the attack. He was faster, stronger. He should have won. But when his blade sank into the human's gut, the man pulled himself closer, forcing the weapon deeper as if embracing it. Kreshtek hesitated. I saw it. The flicker of confusion, the half-second of hesitation he never should have allowed. The human took advantage of it. A hidden blade flashed. The Orator staggered, crimson blooming across his throat. Kreshtek was dead before he hit the ground. A veteran warrior, felled by a creature that should have been his inferior. My blood ran cold. I turned, scanning the battlefield, and realization struck like a hammer to the chest. We were losing. Not in numbers. Not yet. We still outmatched them in strength, in discipline. But the cracks were forming. I could feel them. The way my warriors fought, not with the ruthless precision of conquerors, but with something new. Something dangerous. Hesitation. It crept in like a parasite, feeding on doubt. We were warriors who had never encountered an enemy that refused to fear us. And it was unraveling us, thread by thread. A piercing whistle cut through the chaos, sharp and deliberate. The human commander, a man far too calm for someone facing death, raised his hand. His soldiers responded immediately, shifting, adjusting, moving with a fluidity that should not have existed in a force so seemingly undisciplined. I understood then. Their lack of fear was not foolishness. It was not madness. It was control. The laughter, the taunts, the reckless abandon, it was a performance. A weapon. They were not undisciplined at all. They wanted us off balance. They wanted us to doubt. And it was working. Orator warrior near me faltered, just for a breath, and a human seized the moment. A blade sliced through armor, finding a weak spot. Another warrior, one of my best, fell. I had seen wars turn before, seen how a battle could shift in an instant. I recognized the signs. We needed to retreat. But how could I issue such an order? Orator do not retreat. To pull back now, to withdraw from creatures so much smaller, weaker, it would be unthinkable. And yet, if we stayed, I could see the future unfolding in front of me. We would not fall all at once. It would be gradual, a slow decay. The doubt would spread, the hesitations would multiply, and soon, we would be fighting not to win, but simply to survive. The Orator do not fear. But if we did not leave this battlefield soon, we would learn what fear truly was. I turned to the commander leading our forces, my voice cold, firm. "We fall back." His eyes widened, shock flashing across his face. "We do not retreat. We fall back." I forced the words through clenched teeth. "Now." For a moment, he hesitated. The same hesitation that was already costing us. But then he saw it. The unraveling, the creeping doubt. His jaw tightened, his pride warring with logic, before he gave a sharp nod. The signal was given. One by one, the Orator withdrew, retreating into the shadows of the dying world. Behind us, the humans did not give chase. They did not press their advantage. They cheered. A roar of triumph, of amusement, of something I did not understand. And as we left the battlefield, the sound of their laughter followed us into the dark. The Orator do not retreat. The words echoed in my mind like a curse, a truth ingrained so deeply into my being that it felt like a law of nature. To flee was to surrender. To surrender was to be unworthy of the bloodline that had shaped us into the galaxy's most feared warriors. And yet, we had retreated. I had given the order. I had been the first to see what was coming, the first to recognize the cracks forming beneath the weight of something we had never encountered before. Oh. The war tent was suffocating. No one spoke. No one dared. The air was thick with tension, pressing against my skin like an invisible force. Tactical displays flickered on the walls, their cold blue glow casting jagged shadows across the faces of warriors who had never known shame until now. The scent of burnt ozone and drying blood lingered, clinging to the metal, to the fabric of our war banners, to us. I stood at the center of it all, my weapon untouched at my side, still coated in the blood of an enemy that refused to die properly. The memory of their laughter clung to me like rot, burrowing deep into my thoughts. Across the room, Commander Varrock radiated fury. His jaw was clenched so tightly I expected his teeth to shatter. The scar that ran down his temple pulsed with barely restrained rage. He had fought in more campaigns than I could count. He had carved through enemy lines without hesitation. He had never run. Until today. "You have disgraced us," he finally said, his voice low and sharp. I met his gaze. "We would have lost." His fist slammed onto the metal table between us. "We never lose." A dozen warriors flinched at the impact, but I did not. I held his glare, unwavering. And yet, we left that battlefield alive. Silence. Varaka's nostrils flared. His fury crackled in the air like a live current, poised to strike. His hand curled into a fist, tendons straining against his skin. "You think this was survival?" His voice was quiet now, far more dangerous. That mockery they call battle? That was humiliation. He wasn't wrong. But this had not been a battle, not in the way we understood war. The humans had not overwhelmed us with sheer force, had not shattered us with superior technology. They had done something worse. They had unraveled us. I had seen it in the way my kin hesitated, the way their strikes lost precision, the way their eyes darted across the battlefield, searching for logic in the madness. "What would you have done?" I asked, voice measured. "Stayed? Fought until we fell, confused and broken, never understanding why." Varrock exhaled sharply, his rage sharpening into something colder. "Better to die with honor than live with shame." I tilted my head. Spoken like a warrior who has never been forced to question his own invincibility. His sneer deepened, but I pressed forward. "Tell me, Commander, if you had stayed, if you had fought to your last breath, do you truly believe they would have given you the death you long for?" He did not answer. Because he did not know. Because none of us knew. A low chuckle rippled through the silence, unexpected and deliberate. "Tarek." I turned toward him. He was leaning against a support beam, arms crossed, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. Of all the warriors in this room, I had expected him to hold his tongue. He never spoke unless he found something interesting. And now, something had caught his attention. "The problem," he said, shaking his head, "isn't that we retreated. It's that we don't understand why we had to." The others turned toward him, some bristling, others uncertain. He pushed off the beam and took a slow step forward. We went to that battlefield expecting another conquest. Expected them to beg, to shatter, to fall like the thousands before them. He exhaled, his usual smirk fading. Instead, we were the ones who cracked. A heavy pause settled over the room. Tarek's voice dropped to something quieter. We assumed their weakness, their fragility, their inability to match us in strength. And we were right about those things. He let the words settle before continuing, sharper now. But we failed to ask the only question that mattered. Varaka's voice was a growl. Which is? Tarek's gaze flickered between us, and then, in a tone so casual it made my skin crawl, he said, "Why weren't they afraid?" The words cut through the air like a blade. I swallowed hard. That had been the question burning in my mind since the moment I had locked eyes with one of them. Why weren't they afraid? Varo said nothing. None of them did. Because the truth was as simple as it was horrifying. We had no answer. And until we found one, we would never win. The realization settled in my gut, heavy and cold. I clenched my fists, the weight of our failure pressing into me like a phantom wound. We had miscalculated. We had entered that battle thinking we understood the enemy, thinking we knew how this war would end. We had been wrong. I turned toward the tactical displays, studying the chaotic mess of data pulled from our battlefield recordings. The humans had fought with no clear structure, no predictable patterns. Yet they had moved with purpose. Every action had fed into something larger, something unseen. A game, a test, a ritual, or something worse. Tarek's words hung in the air, but already, my mind was moving. If they did not fear us, then perhaps, something far worse had already taught them not to. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening over the edge of the table. We need intelligence. Information. If we walk onto that battlefield again without understanding what we're up against, we will lose before we even strike. Varog scoffed. So now we play spies instead of warriors? I met his glare. Would you rather walk into the next battle blind again? Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he looked away. That was the closest thing to agreement I would get. I turned to Tarek. I want every piece of data we have on them. Battle records, psychological assessments, pre-war encounters. If there's anything that explains what we saw today, I want to know it. Tarek grinned, but there was no humor in it. Finally, he murmured, something interesting. I looked back at the holo display. The humans were still there, their movements captured in fractured recordings, blurred by the haze of battle. I could see them as they had been, laughing, bleeding, fighting without fear. We had spent centuries believing we were the pinnacle of warriors, that our might was unrivaled. That fear was the natural response to our presence. Now, for the first time, I saw the truth. We were not the predators in this war. Not yet. Warriors do not seek answers. They carve them from flesh, forge them in fire, and silence doubt with the weight of their blades. But I had learned something new. Something dangerous. There were questions a blade could not cut through. The war tent had emptied hours ago, yet I remained. The holo display before me flickered, casting ghostly light across the steel walls. Tactical data scrolled past in an endless stream, useless numbers that told me nothing I did not already know. We had outmatched them in strength. We had outmaneuvered them in tactics. And still we had lost. Behind me, Tarek's voice cut through the silence. You're waiting for the data to say something different. I did not turn. It won't. No, he moved closer, his footfalls measured. So what are you really looking for? Something. Anything. A thread to unravel the madness of what we had faced. They were outnumbered. We cut them down. And yet they never panicked, never faltered. My fingers tightened over the console's edge. They laughed, Tarek. His silence was answer enough. The sound of it still haunted me, a chorus of unbroken spirits echoing in my mind. Warriors did not laugh in the face of death. They cursed, they raged, they fought to their last breath. But they did not enjoy it. Tarek sighed. I combed through every intelligence report. No anomalies, no documented genetic modifications, nothing to suggest they're incapable of fear. He paused, thoughtful. Which means they're either born this way, or trained to be. Training. Conditioning. The thought sent an uneasy ripple through me. What kind of species bred warriors who welcomed death? I turned to him. Their history. Have we uncovered anything? Tarek's smirk was faint, but there was something behind it, something unreadable. Depends. How much do you believe in legends? My brow furrowed. I don't. He flicked a command over the console, and the display shifted. What replaced it was no military record, no list of known strategies or war doctrine. It was a single word, carved into the ruins of a dead language. Eater of gods. A shiver passed through me. Explain. Tarek leaned against the table, arms crossed. Old human myth. No clear origin. The phrase has been found on wrecked ships, burned colonies, places where battles took place long before we crossed their path. He exhaled slowly, and always in the same context. A war fought in shadows, a species devouring their oppressors, learning from them, becoming stronger. I studied the inscription, the jagged, violent strokes of it. You think it refers to them? His gaze met mine. I think it became them. Something cold uncoiled in my stomach. If that was true, then the humans had not simply survived war. They had been shaped by it, molded by the things they fought, adapting, consuming knowledge, and twisting it into something new. I clenched my jaw. That still doesn't explain the laughter. Tarek's smirk widened. Doesn't it? He straightened, pacing slowly. If you strip everything away, fear, morality, hesitation, what's left? Instinct. He turned, his eyes gleaming. And instinct only knows two things: pain and pleasure. The realization settled over me like a weight. They had turned war into pleasure. A rush of unease filled my chest. We had gone to that battlefield expecting to be the monsters in their story. Instead, they had been waiting for us. I exhaled, forcing my mind to still. If this is true, we have no choice. We have to adjust. Tarek grinned, his expression darkly amused. You're thinking of studying them. No, I said, voice quiet. I'm thinking of teaching them fear. Tarek's amusement did not fade. You're assuming it can be taught. I met his gaze. Everything can be taught. Even suffering. Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he nodded. For the first time since the battle, I felt something other than confusion. Something solid. A path forward. The humans had mastered war by becoming the thing they fought. Now it was our turn. We had ruled the battlefield through fear. It was our birthright, passed from one generation of warriors to the next, the foundation upon which the Tor Empire had been built. Every species we had conquered had fallen the same way, first to our blades, then to terror. The sight of us alone was enough to break them, to crush their spirits before the first drop of blood had been spilled. But fear had failed us. The humans had not flinched, had not wavered, had not done what every enemy before them had done. They had laughed. I sat in the war tent, watching battle footage for the 100th time, but the answers I sought remained just out of reach. My fingers hovered over the controls, muscles tight with frustration. The screen before me flickered, replaying the moment again. Tor warrior driving his blade through a human's gut, and the human grinning as he collapsed. The laugh. That laugh. Tarek stood beside me, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Still expecting the recordings to give you a different answer? I exhaled slowly, ignoring the taunt. I need to see it. The exact moment we lost control. He smirked. We never had control. The truth settled like a stone in my chest. We had only believed we did. The battlefield had never belonged to us. We had assumed our victory the moment we stepped onto the soil of that broken world, confident in our superiority. But the humans, they had never assumed anything. They had waited. Watch. Let us think we were in control, until we weren't. A sharp tone interrupted my thoughts. An incoming transmission. One of the teams monitoring human communications had intercepted something. I activated the playback, static crackling before voices cut through. Calm voices. Wasn't bad, actually. It was decent. They hit harder than the last ones. Still didn't break formation, though. You'd think they'd start adapting by now. A short laugh. Not mocking, just amused. I bet the next round will be better. Tarek and I exchanged a glance. Next round. They weren't talking about survival. They weren't discussing strategy. They were speaking the way a predator might after an unsatisfying hunt. Not concerned, only entertained. A chill crawled up my spine. I had assumed the human's resilience was discipline, a carefully constructed tactic meant to unnerve us. But what if it wasn't? What if it was genuine? What if they had fought so many wars against so many enemies that they had simply stopped fearing battle altogether? Tarek exhaled. Well, that's unsettling. I clenched my jaw. Then we give them something they haven't seen before. He raised a brow. You think they've seen everything? No, my grip tightened over the console. But they've never fought us like this. For centuries, the Narrator had relied on fear. We had assumed it to be a universal constant, a law as unbreakable as gravity. If the humans were immune to it, then fear was no longer a weapon we could wield. That meant we needed a new one. I pulled up every intelligence report we had on them, scanning the pages for something, anything. A weakness. A flaw. Tarek watched me, amusement flickering in his eyes. You're looking for an answer to the wrong question. I didn't look up. Enlighten me. You're trying to find out why they don't fear us. He leaned against the table, tilting his head slightly. But the real question is, what do they fear? I paused. The thought had never occurred to me. Every species fears something. It was the most basic law of survival. Even the strongest creatures, the most dominant hunters, had something lurking in the dark that could undo them. What did the humans fear? They did not fear pain. They did not fear death. They did not fear us. I stared at the hollow display, at the battle footage still playing in the background, and felt the unease settle deeper into my bones. I had assumed they were fearless because they had nothing left to fear. But what if the truth was worse? What if they had learned fear so intimately, so completely, that they had evolved past it? A war species, forged in conflict, hardened by something beyond our understanding. We had believed we were the apex predators, but what if the humans had been hunting something far worse than us long before we ever arrived? Tarek must have seen the shift in my expression because his smirk widened. Now you're starting to get it. I pushed away from the console, thoughts churning. We need a new strategy. He nodded. And what do you propose? I looked at him, at the warrior who had always been more strategist than brute, and for the first time, I truly understood what he had been trying to say since this war began. We stop thinking like conquerors, I said, and start thinking like survivors. Tarek let out a low chuckle. So we learn from them. We do what they did, I murmured, the realization sinking in. We adapt. For the first time in my life, I abandoned the certainty that we were the hunters. Because hesitation was a weakness I could not afford, but neither was misjudging the beast before me. The humans had learned from war. Now we would learn from them. And when we returned, we would make them remember what it meant to bleed. The battlefield was quiet. Not silent. War is never silent, but quiet in the way a storm holds its breath before it breaks. The wind carried the scent of scorched metal and disturbed earth, the remnants of past skirmishes still lingering in the dust. I stood at the edge of it all, watching the humans take their positions. They moved with the same unsettling ease as before, adjusting their armor, flexing their fingers over their weapons. Relaxed. Unbothered. They had been waiting for us. And this time we had come prepared. I had spent every waking moment since our retreat dissecting their tactics, their psychology, their hunger for battle. It had consumed me, clawed at my mind, forced me to abandon everything I had once believed. The Narrator did not fear. The Narrator did not adapt. But today we would. I glanced at Tarek. He stood beside me, his usual smirk replaced with something sharper, more deliberate. He had been the first to understand what had to change. Now, as he rolled his shoulders and eyed the enemy, I could see it in him. The shift, the understanding that we were no longer conquerors standing above the prey. We were something else now. Something they had not yet seen. A horn sounded across the field. The humans readied themselves. Some of them grinned. Others whispered to each other, passing idle remarks as if this were nothing more than another day, another game. Not this time. I stepped forward, raising my blade, and my warriors moved as one. Not the rigid, disciplined charge of our Ator tradition, but something else. Something faster, something looser. The formation wasn't perfect. It was unpredictable. Chaotic. We had learned from them. The first clash sent a tremor through my bones. A human met my strike with a raised blade, bracing for the familiar power of a Arator attack. But I did not give him that. I shifted, feinted, moved in a way he did not expect. The brief flicker of surprise in his eyes was all I needed. I drove my weapon through his ribs and twisted. A breath. A pause. He stumbled back, coughing blood, but not laughing. Not this time. The battle unfolded around me, different from before. The humans were still ruthless, still fast, still precise. But they were no longer the only ones playing this game. My warriors had abandoned their stiffness, their predictability. They ducked, wove, adjusted. They let the fight move through them instead of against them. For the first time, the humans hesitated. I saw it. I felt it. Their rhythm faltered, their attack slowed, not by fear, but by something else. Confusion. Frustration. Uncertainty. They had spent this war treating us as an opponent they had already figured out. A known challenge. A routine. Now, suddenly, we weren't. Tarek cut down an opponent beside me, exhaling sharply as he turned. "They're trying to adjust," he said. "They don't like not knowing what's coming." I met his gaze. "Then let's make sure they never do." We pressed harder. I moved through the chaos, cutting and striking, but always moving, always shifting. The humans fought back just as viciously, but the difference was there, deepening with every moment. We were forcing them to react. They had never had to before. A cry rose from their ranks, not a shout of victory, but of anger. A soldier slammed his fist into the ground after missing a strike. Another cursed as his attack met only air. And there it was. The first flicker of frustration turned into something deeper. For the first time, a human's fingers trembled around the hilt of their weapon. Their breath quickened. Their confidence wavered. I exhaled, my chest rising with something unfamiliar. Satisfaction. A human woman lunged at me, her blade sharp and fast. I sidestepped, not with brute force, but with something smoother, something flowing. She overcorrected. I saw it in the way her foot slipped, in the widening of her eyes. She knew she had made a mistake. And when I drove my blade into her shoulder, she did not laugh. She screamed. The sound cracked through the battlefield, cutting through the air like a signal, a breaking point. Heads turned toward the noise, toward her. A tremor passed through their ranks. Small, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. I grinned. It was over. The battle did not last much longer. They fought fiercely, as they always did, but the moment had already come and gone. Their certainty was gone. Their control had slipped. And once it was gone, there was no getting it back. One by one, the humans fell back. They did not call it a retreat. They made it look orderly, strategic. But we knew. We knew. The battlefield was ours. And this time, as we stood amid the fallen, it was not our warriors who hesitated. It was them. Tarek let out a low, breathless chuckle beside me. "I can't believe it." I turned to him. "Believe it." His grin returned. "So, this is what it feels like." I knew what he meant. The shift. The reversal. The moment when the predator realizes it is no longer at the top. The humans had spent this war believing they had nothing left to fear. Today, we had given it back to them. I looked across the field, watching their forces disappear into the horizon. They would return. We all knew that. This war was not over, and it would not end easily. But when they returned, it would not be with laughter. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of it settle over me. For the first time we had won.